going, Mark?
Hi.
We're good. Thank you.
I'm good, thank
Good to
you.
see you. Excellent. Mignon said she's on her way. She'll be with us in 1 minute. How's your week been? Mark, how's your week been?
Yeah, mine's been fine. We're all just sort of gearing up for Christmas now. I've got some things that I need to do in the next couple of days, but trying to find a bit of time just to spend with the kids and the family and stuff. So although I haven't completely wound down, like today was relatively good, relatively relaxed until I had a podcast before this and now this. So but yeah, trying to get a bit of time with the kids and the family. So
it's good.
How
many kids do you have?
I've got 2 girls, 4 and 6, nearly 5 and 7.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah, they're a hand.
Hey there, sorry.
Hi, Mignon.
Hey, how's it going, Mignon?
Good, how are you? Sorry, my computer crashed just as I tried to join.
Oh, of course. That's usually when it happens.
Wheel of death.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think we can get going if you want.
Yeah, I'll give a quick intro and then I'll try to make it more brief than typical. So just welcome everybody seeing us out online on Facebook, YouTube to the Business Podcast Mastermind. A few talented friends started this. We're basically here to help you grow your audience, grow your revenue. We have guests every other week, and then we discuss points. Rob Greenlee is here, VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. He's a co-host. Another co-host is not present at the moment, Henry Lopez, a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. Vinay, another co-host, host of the Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And I'm Ethan Janney, a business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast, which invites 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas and the action steps to launch them. And I'll let Rob introduce our guest for today. He's invited Mignon Fogarty.
Yeah, we're honored to have Mignon Fogarty on the call to talk about some interesting podcasting related stuff, but actually a little bit beyond that. But she's a former faculty member in journalism at the University of Nevada, Reno, and a former science writer as well, and produces a lot of educational podcasts, and she's done a lot of multimedia stuff around English and grammar, and she has been operating a podcast called Grammar Girl. It was part of the Quick and Dirty Tips network for many years. It's for many years now. It's been part of the Macmillan publishing empire, and so she's also in the Podcasting Hall of Fame as well. And just wanted to invite her on because I think she's got a lot of insight into the production of short form, value-packed audio content, and then has a lot of insight into how to grow shows and how to become really kind of a multimedia content creator, and kind of how that can help podcasting. So Mignon, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, why don't you give everybody kind of like a quick snapshot of the Quick and Dirty Tips Network if they haven't heard about it before, and your Grammar Girl podcast you've been doing for how long now? Has it been like 14 years, 13 years?
It's going to be 15 years in
15
July,
years.
I think.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
It's been a long time. So I started the Grammar Girl podcast oh so long ago, and it's a scripted show. It's a quick writing tip every week. It started being 2 or 3 minutes. It's now more like 12 or 15. It's gotten longer over the years.
Well, that's what happens, right, Mignon?
We're podcasters. We like to talk.
Right. Yeah.
So then when Grammar Girl did really well right out of the gate, and I had worked at a bunch of startups in Silicon Valley. So I knew when my podcast did so well that I had the basis for a business. And so I started a podcast network, Quick and Dirty Tips, pretty soon after Grammar Girl. And you had, Mr. Manners and Money Girl and The Mighty Mommy and shows like that all followed the same quick and dirty tip format. So it's really the format that ties together the shows in the network, because I thought that was, a thing that was working. And so I grew that to 6 or 7 shows by myself and was running that while I was doing freelance work on the side, and still is, my job. And I was looking for a partner. And so I was very fortunate, and the Wall Street Journal picked Grammar Girl as its web pick of the day. And after that, I was approached by a number of potential partners, and I ended up partnering with Macmillan Publishing to grow the network even more. So I did a book deal and a partnership over the network. And so then until about 2009, I was very involved in the day-to-day operations. I was editing all the scripts and helping with production. And then sort of as the network grew even more, and I was writing more than a book a year at that point too. I've written, I think it was 7 books in 6 years. So around 2009, I handed over day-to-day operations of the network to the Macmillan Group. And I still, I'm still Grammar Girl, and I'm still involved in a lot of the big, decisions, but I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations anymore. So that's sort of the big picture.
So you're doing more shows than just Grammar Girl, or that's what you've been focused on mainly, is the Grammar Girl?
I just do Grammar Girl. Yeah.
Okay.
I when I was a professor, so there were 3 years where I was the chair of media entrepreneurship at the University of Nevada. And during that time, I produced a podcast called Open Room Media that highlighted the stories of media entrepreneurs. And I did that with graduate students. So it was a way for graduate students to learn about podcasting. So I did that for a time. And for a time, I did a show called Behind the Grammar too, that was sort of me talking about things. But Grammar Girl is the one thing that I've done consistently over all the years, and I'm still doing.
So one of the topics that we had come up a lot last week was talking about, maybe creating a book or something like that as a way to build your credibility in your audience and get other opportunities. And I know you've done that a lot. What's been your kind of experience with that? I mean, is that something that's still a viable strategy today, you think?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So publishers like when authors have a platform, when you already when you have an audience that will buy your book, that you're not building that from scratch. And sometimes they call that platform authors. So and that was really what happened in the original deal with Macmillan. Like, they approached me because they saw that I had a big platform and wanted me to write books. And then it sort of turned out that we had some common interests in digital business, and we're able to grow, beyond that. But it was really started out being all about the book. And one of the things they saw about the network is that it would be a way for them to sort of vet people who might be good authors for them. So a lot of our hosts from the Quick and Dirty Tips podcast network have ended up writing books with Macmillan. So if the podcast does well, then they tend to write a book. And then more and more lately, we've been highlighting Macmillan authors on our podcast. So, I've had Macmillan authors as guests on my podcast, and other authors too. Like, it's not just Macmillan, but, authors make great guests because they're willing to come on when they have new books out. And it's a good back and forth. And I do think, as anyone who owns a business, I think it's important to have multiple revenue streams. That makes you more secure in any kind of uncertain environment. So, if suddenly advertising gets a little shaky, well, you've got your book revenue, and that helps balance things out. And that has certainly happened over the years, that, one source of revenue will grow, but another one will shrink. And we sort of, have been very grateful to have these different things over the years to balance everything out. So I think, yes, a podcaster should absolutely have, podcasters should have their own products, whatever that is. I have games too, and I do speaking, and, all those things, and together they build a stable business. And I think that's so important. So, a book is one of the easier things to produce. I think it was easier to write a book than make a game, probably. So I think it's something that's accessible to a lot of podcasters. And, if your audience is enthusiastic, like, they're excited to buy something from you. When you talk about your book as you're thinking about it and then writing about it, and then as it comes out, and to build excitement for this product that you have, and your audience, will be excited to have a way to support you and hear more from you in another format.
So you approached it more book first, then podcast, or was podcasting kind of always part of the plan? And I mean, but most people today, they're launching a podcast first, and then they're thinking about a book. How should you make that transition, do you think, from doing a podcast on a topic into making a book?
Sure. I mean, I think of myself as a podcaster first. I definitely didn't get in this to write a book. That was a nice surprise. I was an English major, and so like, I think maybe every English major maybe fantasizes about writing a book, but it wasn't anything I was looking to do. I was producing my podcast, and then I was excited when the Wall Street Journal thought it was great. And then suddenly I was approached by publishers who wanted a book. And at the time that seemed surprising to me, but now in retrospect, it seems sort of obvious because they're looking for people, with a profile that they can have write a book for them. So yeah, if you get featured in any kind of major media, there's a chance agents or book publishers could come knocking on your door. Now that doesn't help a lot of people, right? Because you get PR, and then if you're lucky enough to get featured, then you can write a book. Well, people who have a podcast just want to know, well, how can I write a book if I don't get featured in the Wall Street Journal, right? Right. So I think it's important to look at what do you have to offer. I mean, for me, with an educational podcast, it's pretty obvious to put together a book. For a comedy podcast, for example, or it might be a little tougher to come up with a topic. So, you should really spend a lot of time. Also, so writing a book is still really hard work. It's going to take you a long time. So it has to be something you're excited about, and something that you want to make sure it makes business sense before you spend 6 months working on it. So, spend a lot of time up front thinking about what you have to offer in a book format. Is it your advice? Is it your inspiration? Is it your recipes? Like for me, it was obvious. It was grammar tips. Those books exist. But I think it's important to think about what your audience would want from you enough to buy, and what you can be excited enough about to sustain the work it's going to take to put it together.
So how do you think about the topics in the podcast versus what's in the book? I mean, do you get strategic on that and think about, not giving away too much in the podcast, but trying to, go into greater detail in the book, or what's the balance there? Yeah.
So I feel like they're completely different audiences. They're not different audiences, but if just because someone has heard it in your podcast doesn't mean they aren't going to want it in a book. Right. So
or can they be the same thing? Really?
My first book was exactly the same thing.
Okay.
My first book, which was a New York Times bestseller, that's going in my obituary. So that was almost 100% scripts from my podcast. So, that first year or so, I covered a lot of the basic topics, affect versus effect, how to use the semicolon. And those were the same basic fundamentals of grammar that went into the book. So I took the scripts that I had for the podcast and brushed them up and made sure they hung together as a whole book, but it was essentially the same as my podcast. I think you think about how the organization makes sense. So I don't think people mind at all if it's the same. I think that's fine. Now I do a lot of gee whiz, isn't language cool kind of topics, like what does it mean to hunker down? What's the origin of the word hunker? And so like I haven't put those kinds of topics in a book yet. Some people have expressed interest in like a book on English idioms and things like that, but I haven't done it. But, so I think you can maybe pick and choose things from your podcast, and maybe they all make sense together in your show, but you can split them up and group them differently so that they make sense as a themed book. But it just depends on your show, like what type of show it is. So it's really thinking about what makes sense. And I don't think people mind at all if it's the same.
So we have a question from Deborah here. She asks, what makes a network, as far as you're thinking of it? I know when you started, you had multiple shows, but how did you evolve that, and what was the keys to making a network work?
The really important thing about a network to me is that everyone works together to promote each other's shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually, I had a science show first. I was a science writer and I was part of a network, but I didn't feel like it did anything to
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what it really did. It was like, we're a network, but like nobody
Right.
helped each other promote their shows. And so I felt, and I also so after that experience too, I felt like it was really important for the people who run the network to have control of the shows so that
Mm-hmm.
they could like make everyone support each other. And so, you know, we can, we own the show. So Macmillan and I own the shows in the network, and we pay the hosts to create the shows, and so we can say, okay, this week, show A, you are promoting show B in your podcast, and we get
Mm-hmm.
in. Here's a script. You know, here's what we would like you. You know, everyone would like you to say. So, you know, and it's just creating that supportive environment where where everyone is thinking about helping each other, you know. And so when we launch a new show in the network, we can do promos across every show in the network. And so it really helps launch new things,
Mm-hmm.
because you can get the word out across, you know, a large number of listeners. So I think that, to me, that's sort of the most valuable part of having a network or being in a network.
Because certainly a network of shows that have separate owners, separate creators, probably don't have that same kind of camaraderie of promotion. You know, I don't know if you've had experience with that as well in comparison.
I haven't, but I think you really need someone, someone whose responsibility is to make sure that everybody is thinking about supporting everyone else how they can.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
The thing is, I think back to the early days of the podcasting medium, there were networks that were loosely formed like that had independent creators in there, and they weren't owned by the network. And what a lot of people found is that a lot of creators, especially as time went by, felt competitive, right, to each other, and didn't want to share audience quite as much. So that's what's always held back the cross promotional stuff, and you still see it today. It bubbles up out there, you know, companies trying to do this cross promotion stuff, and what they all wind up finding is that not everybody wants to participate because of that. Yeah.
And then sometimes we do a themed week across the whole network, you know, and actually we do shows sometimes together. So I did a show with the Savvy Psychologist where we talked about sleep, and we talked about, what was it we talked about? It's escaping my mind. Oh no, we talked about certain people have like a physical reaction to hating words so much. So you'll hear how people like hate the word moist. And that's like a real thing in psychology. So we talked about what some of the words are, and then we talked about sort of like what is known about the science of why that happens. So, you know, what's nice is we have an editor who edits all our work and knows who's doing what topic every week. And so she's always looking for opportunities where we can work together and do shows together, which also helps promote other people on the network. And then we also have producers, and, you know, there are people who handle like our social media and our ads, and we have producers who do the production work for our shows. And so there's like a structure that sort of takes care of all the hard things too. Like we just make our shows.
Right. So over the years, I mean, I think when you guys started out, I think you were doing fairly short, I mean, really short episodes, right? You were doing like 5-7 minute
Even
range?
shorter, 2 or 3 when I first started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then over the years, you've kind of gotten a little longer. Is that just because it's difficult to drive a lot of value into content that's too short, or is it just kind of like just a different appeal? Because I've always heard, I mean, especially over the last couple of years, there's been this gravitational feeling that I've heard from the community about shows are on average getting shorter. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that length issue, especially in the type of content that you're producing.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things. Like we said at the beginning, we were joking, like we're podcasters and we like to talk. So I feel like there's always more to say.
Right. Yeah.
But it is true that the show is generally the reason the show is longer is so it can support advertising.
Right.
I don't want to put an ad in a 3-minute show. It's just not a good
You can only
experience.
put one in there probably, or if it's
Yeah.
longer.
In the way that my show now is, it's like 12 to 15 minutes, and there's usually 2 segments. So each segment is still pretty short, because I think that sort of is what works for my kind of tip-based content. But so I've done, now there's 2 segments, and then for more than a year now, I've had a listener call at the end too. So you were saying at the beginning, like talking about engagement and growing your audience. One thing I did in the beginning and then stopped for many years and then started again is I take voicemail from callers. And what I do now is I ask people to share their family dialect story. So if you have a word that your family and only your family uses, which tend to be fun little stories, you can call and leave a voicemail, and I'll play it at the end of the show. So that also usually adds a minute or 2 to the end of the show, and people really seem to like it. They love all these stories. So I think engaging your callers through voicemail or voice chat is another super great way to build loyal listeners and grow your audience.
Right. Ethan, you had a couple of questions. Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we don't need to cover everyone. I just wanted to say what was going on in my head. So I'll just mention the first one here. Were you surprised when the podcast took off so quickly? I mean, it sounds like maybe you were just starting something on the side, or was it something where you're like, no, this is going to be huge? Or, I mean, everybody expects.
So surprised.
You were surprised, yeah.
Well, it was very early too. It was very early in the podcasting space.
But I felt like it was late. That's the hilarious thing too.
Well,
so I had a science podcast for about 8 months before Grammar Girl, and I had done everything I could think of to promote it. I put flyers up all over town and everything, and it did okay, but it wasn't huge. And it took a lot of time. And so when I started Grammar Girl, I was looking for something shorter and simpler that would take less of my time. And so I put it out there, and it just took off. I didn't do anything, and it took off way more than the science podcast. I think it went up to number 2 at iTunes within 6 weeks, and it was just word of mouth. People were really excited about it, and then and then it turns out writers, are excited that a grammar podcast is doing well. So I got a lot of press because writers thought it was cool, and so that really helped. But it just I was stunned. But then because I am sort of entrepreneurial at heart, and I had worked at startups. Once it took off, I knew that it could be a business. I absolutely knew it could be something big. And that was when I started adding other shows and creating a network.
Yeah, I think the key for there is not just sort of like the interest in oh, was it, were you surprised? I think it's kind of like that trick of really paying attention to when something is clicking and doubling down on it. It seems like you did a really good job of keeping your eye out for something that's going to go somewhere and putting some extra energy into it.
Can I point out, I think it's really important to be able to quit something too. Like I said, I had the science podcast. It was going okay, but it wasn't ever going to be something that was worth my time. I was a freelancer, so time really is money when you're a freelancer. So I think not being afraid to quit something that isn't working too is important, because that let me try the new thing that did work.
Right.
Was I don't know if we specifically cover this in detail with Deb's question. She was kind of curious about the difference between a media entity and a network. Did we cover that?
No, not specifically.
Yeah. Do you see those as different things? Like, do you see, you have a podcasting network, of course, that's very exclusive to podcasting. Do you consider yourself as having started a media company, or do you see people that have done that from podcasting? And Deb, if you have a clarification too, you're welcome to chime in.
Hey, it's just a question. So you talk about a network, we mutually support each other, but are we all doing our own thing, but working collaboratively? Whereas maybe a media company, you're using some of the same resources. I just need to know the difference, because it's a concept I've been thinking about.
I guess I feel like we are probably more of a media company now, because the website is also a huge part of our revenue. So podcasting isn't everything, for sure. So between the books and the website, And the podcast, that's the whole business. Well, not the whole business, but I mean, we also have online courses. I mean, there are other things, but so I was the chair of media entrepreneurship. So I guess, yeah, it's like, it is a media company. Like, because of my roots, I think that's why I think of myself primarily as a podcaster. But if you asked if we're a podcasting network or a media company, I think a media company is a more accurate description today. Yeah.
Well, because you actually merged with a larger media company too. That's the other thing that happened to you specifically, is the Macmillan organization is a huge media company.
Right. And it's a partnership. Yeah. So yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see here. What else?
I had other questions. I don't know if you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Quick question about the WSJ article, the Wall Street Journal article. You mentioned you were looking for a partner, and then they started reaching out to you because they saw you in the article. Is it something that you kind of lofted out there, that you were putting the word out that you're looking for a partner? It just so happened that the attention garnered made them come knocking.
Yeah. I had been talking to another company or two about being partners before that happened. I believe it was so long ago. I actively didn't seek out venture backing because I had worked at venture-backed companies and I didn't want that for myself.
What is it, the stress or like the pressure or something? Or
yeah, well, the stress, the pressure,
lot of uncertainty, right?
I saw a lot of founders get forced out.
Right.
I saw and irresponsible spending of money. Like, I wanted to create a sustainable business, and venture-backed companies, it seemed like, here, let's throw $5 million, $10 million at you, get as big as you can in a year and sell, and it seemed like it's, and more often than not, that ends up with nobody getting anything. Like, the venture companies make big bets on a lot of companies and expect only 10% of them to actually work. And so you're taking a big risk too. Right. Like, there's the big payout, but there's a big risk, and you might end up with nothing. Odds are you will end up with nothing. So, and you'll work like an insane person and probably be really unhappy and unhealthy. So that was my view of venture-backed companies, having been in a couple. So I was looking for a business partner. Right. So I was talking to some companies, but then, and it was interesting because the Wall Street Journal article was actually about the website and only kind of mentioned the podcast. But after that, I was approached by 5 different publishers, and I think it was, and so then I pitched back to them that I wasn't just interested in a book. I was interested in a partner for the whole business, and here's what it could be. Like, here's my vision for everything it could be. And Macmillan was, in particular, had a digital initiative at that time and was looking to get into digital businesses. And so it was a super good fit. And I really hit it off with John Sterling, who was the guy in charge at that time. And so
quick question. When did you start the partnership? First question, when did you start the partnership? Secondly, from a contractual basis, is it a 50-50 split between you and Macmillan? And have you sort of come to where are you satisfied where Macmillan and you are taking your podcast and the rest of your businesses forward? Are you still happy with, you said that you wanted a partnership rather than a sort of venture funding? Are you still happy with the way that it's all moving forward?
Sure, yeah. So let's see, we partnered in early 2007.
Okay.
And then they took over more in 2009. I can't tell you what the split is, but I can tell you it's healthy. Okay, I'm happy with it. This is my full-time job. And yeah, I mean, I'd say early on, I mean, there's always, every partnership has struggles, right? I mean, nothing is puppies and rainbows, but overall, I'm very happy. It's worked out well, and I get to do, in 2009, when the partnership changed, I had to decide at that point whether I wanted to be Grammar Girl or be in charge of the business, because it became, at that time I was kind of doing both and it was too much. Like the network had grown too big, Grammar Girl had grown too big. I couldn't do it all. And that was sort of the point where I had to choose what my role was going to be. And I chose to be Grammar Girl instead of like the CEO or the president of the entire enterprise. And that's a decision that I'm still very happy with today. And just this morning, actually, I was talking to my husband, telling him how much I hate managing people. So there was something this morning I should have asked someone to do for me, and I just did it myself because it was easier. And like, you can't run an enterprise with that attitude. You have to delegate a lot, and I'm not good at that. So, I think at 2009, I was ready to just fire everyone and be Grammar Girl by myself again. So it was a really good transition for me. And they do so much that I just wouldn't want to or be good at doing. I mean, even just the legal support that they provide, I have access to their legal department when there's a problem, and that is hugely helpful. So, it reduces a lot of stress for me.
That's amazing. Sorry, just a quick thing. Amazing the sort of self-reflection that you thought that you weren't right to run the business. Like, you dropped your ego, which is probably harder for men than women. But I think that's amazing that you had that sort of self-reflection, that you knew you weren't right to run the business and you were better being Grammar Girl.
Yeah, and I think happier too. They were teasing me when my, I think it was my second book came out. They showed me the cover, and I asked them to make my name smaller and to make Grammar Girl bigger. So I'm like, no one cares who I am. They're here for Grammar Girl, and they're like, you're the only author who has ever asked us to make their name smaller. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's a great kind of lead into another part of this too, and how important was building your reputation, I guess. And another topic that we've talked about in this mastermind group is, what's the power of being an influencer in a particular genre or topic area, and how important was that to you, or did it just happen naturally because of your willingness to share?
I think it happened naturally because I'm not very comfortable thinking of myself as an influencer. In fact, my editors often tell me, Mignon, people want to know what you think, and tell them what you think, not just what AP Style in Chicago say, but what you think. So I think I'm a scientist by training. I have a master's in biology, and to me, it's important to do research and report things accurately. And when you're a scientist, like, your opinion doesn't matter. It doesn't come into play. You're supposed to be objective. And so I think I carry that forward over into my work as an educator, in the podcast. But whether I like it or not, I am an influencer. And so, I try to elevate other people's work. I love having other authors on my show and talking to them about their work. And when Chicago or AP, those are the two style guides I typically follow the closest. When they change their style, I always comment on it because that's fun and people do want to know what I think. I have tried to, because my brand is being fun and friendly and supportive, it doesn't work for me to criticize the grammar of celebrities or politicians. My job, as I see it, is to support people who want to improve their writing and to generate enthusiasm and excitement about the English language and how cool it is, not to be out there knocking people down or showing how superior I am or making people feel bad about their language. So it's a little bit hard for me to comment on pop culture or things that are in the culture when it comes to language, because it's almost always like critical. So that's an area where I would say I still struggle with how to handle that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine
I just have a.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that's probably something that you've struggled with because of people's perception of your expertise in English, and that they would want to be critiqued or something like that, right?
Yeah, and a lot people who don't follow me as closely, who aren't like major fans who are familiar with my philosophy, and when people meet me, they expect that I'm the nitpicker who's critical, and I'm just not. That's not my brand. So I don't know.
Go ahead, Ethan.
At that moment, I had 2 joke questions that I was just going to get in. One of them was, you mentioned the legal department when you get into trouble. Do you get into trouble for like telling people how to speak or something? I'm assuming it's just contracts you have to write up or something, right?
Yeah, it's they review all the contracts with all the partners and
all the creators, right? All the podcasters,
the creators and the ad networks and that. And I guess I think I can talk about this now. So we were part. I was targeted by the podcast patent, the digital audio. If you remember that, the
personal audio,
personal audio. Yeah, they sent me like a letter, like I was a target of them, and so that was terrifying, huge, scary, terrifying. And so
I'm not aware of what that was. Is there like a 1-sentence summary of what that was?
So there was a patent troll who said they owned all of podcasting, and that everyone who was podcasting was infringing on their patent, and you were going to have to pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars,
or millions in the case of some of the bigger media companies, right?
Yeah, and it was really hard. So Macmillan, their legal handled it. I had to pay part of it. Macmillan, but they handled it, and the hardest part was they told me I couldn't talk about it. So they said if I talked about it at all, if I liked a tweet that talked about it, they wouldn't represent me. And so, as a podcaster who likes to talk, it was incredibly hard not to be able to sort of share what I was going through. But it was an extraordinary help and relief to know that they had my back and we're going to take care of it. So that was huge.
Yeah, I think all that really hit the fan probably about four years ago. And Mr. Adam Carolla came out and did a big campaign to raise money across the podcasting space to fund the Electronic Frontier Foundation to go after them. So that's a little bit of that's a brief history of what happened. And then here, I think it was just last month, Mignon, that the final ruling came down saying that the whole patent had been thrown out. And
I think the Supreme Court declined to hear their appeal a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, yay, it's over.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Really took it a long way, though. That's really impressive. Like how big that got.
It's this whole thing. I think there's a This American Life episode about it that explains the whole thing.
Trolls,
yeah,
I know. I contributed about $400 or $500 to the legal defense fund myself personally, because it was such a big threat to the space.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll bring us back on track, maybe, or I don't know if that was off track, but just back to some of the questions I had. I noticed you're mentioning, you were in academia. I've been in academia. I went so far as the PhD. I've wondered if I even want to get back into it. I don't know if you left partly because you're like, I don't want to be in academia anymore. But you mentioned many things that you're doing, academia, Silicon Valley startups, the podcast, you have this network. And I'm just curious if you have any, is this overcomplicated? Have you left academia behind? So that's just, you don't have to worry about that anymore. When does it feel like there's maybe too many things going on, or when is it actually helpful that you have all these things going on?
Yeah. So I was in a PhD program in biology at Stanford, and I dropped out after 4 years to join my friends.com startup in 1999. So at the time, it became very clear to me that there weren't good jobs for PhDs in biology, or that I would have to go to the one city in the whole country that had a job open. At the time, I was on the job market, and I just felt like, and it's funny, but I'm clumsy, and also a laboratory is not a good place for me. I spilled something on my head once. It was like a bacterial culture, and it turned out it was like the one culture where nothing had grown. But it just became kind of clear. I didn't feel like maybe I belonged in a lab. But I loved teaching, and I loved writing grants. And so I was always a little sad when I left with my master's, like, oh, I'm not going to be a professor. And then the job at University of Nevada just fell into my lap. So I guest lectured in someone's class, the radio class, and then afterward he called me and said, "We have an opening that would be perfect for you. We would love for you to apply." And I had a week to decide whether I wanted to apply to be their chair of media entrepreneurship. And I thought I could never be a professor, and then suddenly this became available because I didn't get my PhD. And in science, you have to have a PhD, but in journalism, a master's is enough. So it was a shock to me that I could even do it. And so I was really excited. Oh my gosh, I wanted to be a professor. I can be a professor. This department is so cool. Everyone's really nice. And it's 2 miles from my house. I don't even have to move. So I applied and they hired me. And I did that for 3 years, and I loved it. I mean, I loved having colleagues again. I worked from home, and it was so nice to be able to go in and have coworkers in an office, and the students were wonderful. I didn't love teaching. I loved teaching the graduate students, but the undergrad classes were a little tough because you get like half your class is students who 11 o'clock on a Wednesday worked for them, and they don't really care about what you're teaching. And so I found that really challenging. But really what I found is I couldn't do that and Grammar Girl as well as I wanted to be doing either of those things. Nobody complained. Nobody said, oh, you're not doing a good job, you need to buck up. But I felt like I wasn't doing as good a job as I could at either of them. And I also felt like my family wasn't getting the best of me anymore. I was exhausted all the time, and I felt like that wasn't fair to my husband. And so, for all those reasons, I ended up leaving. It was hard to leave the academic job, but it was the right choice. I'm happier now, so I think it was a good choice.
That's good.
Do you feel like spread thin? My second question, and sort of on the same topic, was like, making games, making books, making a podcast. Of course, you're doing these things because they're working, and so there's a certain level at which it makes sense to expand to these different areas. And then I'm guessing there's certain place where you got to limit them. Have you tried some things and just like abandoned them that were similar? How much do you think about expansion versus like limiting what you're doing?
Yeah, I used to be a crazy, insane workaholic. And when I stopped, and I think that was a good thing. When I quit the academic job, at that point was sort of the breaking point where I was like, okay, I want a sane life, and work isn't everything that matters, and I'm not going to overwork anymore. Actually, my academic colleagues, they're wonderful people, and they really taught me a lot. And what I saw is that when Christmas break came, for example, one of my friends went back east to watch the maple flow from the trees. He took like a vacation to do this weird esoteric thing. And I worked all Christmas to get ahead on Grammar Girl so that I could teach when I came back. And if I ever took a vacation, it was to see family because I felt obligated. And it was the only time I had. And I'm like, what? People take vacations like for fun? I honestly, I had not really been around people who did that. I was in grad school at Stanford, which is an incredibly intense environment. Then I was at VC-backed startups. And then I had my own company. I mean, I never was around people who took vacations. Yep. And when I saw that was possible, that and a few other things combined, with life, I was like, you know what? I want something different out of life. And so I don't feel over busy now. I don't work myself to death, but I there was a time when I did, but I try not to glorify that anymore.
Got it.
Yeah, yes. I agree. I can associate with that. I can associate with that overwork, working for startups, and yeah, vacations. What are those? Right.
They're so nice. I love them now, or I did before the pandemic.
Right.
it seems like the heuristic for you at the moment is, yes, you'll take on a new thing, but you also have this sort of prioritization of your peace of mind.
Yeah. So actually, the last month I made a list of all the potential projects I can do, and I'm going to pick one big project for the next year. And I'm going to be very deliberate, like what makes the most sense. And I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm not going to do them all.
Breaking news here.
No.
What is the project?
There's so much. There's 10 things I could do that would be fun and would make a lot of sense, but I'm going to do one. Yeah.
So I don't know if you thought about this or not, but if you started a new podcast, what do you think that might be, just based on what you've learned or what you're seeing going on in the world today in maybe your genres, or something that you're thinking about?
I do think about it. I think because of the pandemic, I have missed being a science writer. I was a science writer before I was Grammar Girl. Right. And so I think about that a little bit, but I don't really, that feels too intense actually to me. Mm-hmm. Like everyone is so angry, and I don't know, I just don't see myself doing that. But the one thing I do think about is, so one of the things I did, not when I quit, but after I quit the academic job, is I took there's this course at Yale that is the happiness course by Laurie Santos. She has a podcast too, that I think it's called the Happiness Lab, but I like the course better. And I took the course, the happiness course, and it really made a difference in my life. And it helped me truly like be happier and mm-hmm. commit to this better life. And so I could imagine, and yet it's like all these things that you do, it's like they're easy, like meditating and keeping a gratitude journal and stuff I thought was completely stupid before, actually. But like when I forced myself to do it, it really made a difference. It worked. And it's the kind of thing that I feel like I could use refreshers and encouragement. And so I sometimes think about doing a podcast about the science of happiness. That's what I really loved about the course, is it was science-based. So as a former scientist, it appealed to me that it was based on research. And so I sometimes think about doing something along those lines, sort of as a way to keep myself engaged and help others, because it helped me so much. I think it would help others. But I don't know, then it's like, it's a lot of work. And would it infringe on this? I wonder, like, okay, would it be motivating for me, or am I just slipping back into my workaholic ways and starting a whole nother podcast? So I have to think about that.
I've got a question about, how do you refresh Grammar Girl to keep it interesting for yourself and your audience?
Yeah, well, sometimes I take listener questions, and so that can be a fresh approach. I have used guest writers a lot the last maybe 6 years, because they bring ideas that I wouldn't have had. So I've got a show coming out in a couple of weeks about Latin abbreviations, like et al. And that it wouldn't have occurred to me to write about those. So I have other people giving me ideas. And then when there is a pop culture way to tie in a topic, I always jump on that. Like if it's not being critical, but maybe like the Olympic theme song had a grammar error a few years ago. And so I felt like I could write about that without seeming too nitpicky and critical. But it's a fine line, so, and I have definitely expanded. So there is a whole, like before it was all quick and dirty tips, like how to use a semicolon, that versus which, affect versus effect. And now I've added topics that aren't so tip-based, but are more like, oh, isn't this interesting thing about language? So, and occasionally I do interviews now, which I never did before. So I might do an interview every month or two. And so that's a way to freshen it up too. I was worried that the listeners would feel like I was getting too far away from the quick and dirty tip promise. But as far as I can tell, nobody minds. And whenever I've surveyed people, they all say they like the interviews. And it seems I was worried about nothing.
Did you feel like there was like maybe a limited time span of the technical quick and dirty tips? Is that what it was? Or was it more of your shifting to being more less technical and more kind of, I don't know if the term environmental, or, applying some aspects of humor and entertainment to the production? Is that, I mean, was there
I
a
think
shift in you that caused that?
the new topics have definitely helped me be engaged, because to me it's more interesting looking at the etymology of a word than looking up a rule. Sometimes looking up a rule is interesting, but really I just came to I feel like I'm on show number 804. So you've done, like, I've covered everything, almost everything that people want to know. And, I'm doing a lot of reruns now, and I don't do straight reruns. I go back and revisit the topic, and usually I'll find, if I wrote it 5 years ago, there's something more I can find out to make it even more interesting, go more in depth on maybe the origin of a rule or something. So I'm doing quite a few reruns or rewrites of things, that I did 10 years ago. It's maybe been 10 years since I covered how to use a colon or something like that, and I'll forget because we promote things on social media so often that I will have seen it promoted recently, and then I'll go look and I'm like, wow, that's really old. It's been 10 years since it's been in the podcast. So I think I can get away with redoing it. So
but that's also part of the bigger strategy of having content that continues to get a lot of listens, even though they're old, right?
Yeah, we get more content, more downloads from our archives from the new shows. The evergreen content aspect is great. Yeah.
So does that really help the business model, I would imagine?
It has, especially with the ability to insert ads now. We got our archive set up so that we can do dynamic ad insertion. And so we're starting to see more and more ads coming in that way. For years, we couldn't put ads in the archives, which made me crazy because, advertisers, they didn't seem to understand that what matters is when someone listens, not when the show was released. And so we just couldn't, for almost a decade, it seems like we couldn't monetize our archives. And now I think it was in the last year or two that we've been able to. And, it's definitely a growth part of our business. And it's gratifying that it's finally working.
Well, it's almost like a royalty-based business structure now, right? Where your past work is paying off continuously, right?
Much more so than, 5 years ago. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's I think what's nice about the evergreenness of it is, like if you were to do something about science, right? Science changes all the time. You could say something is accepted as, fact now one day, and then, okay, they go in more detail and no, this is how it works. So that's really interesting about the topic that you've chosen. Thus, there's going to be some very consistent things. There's going to be some things that change too, but there's always going to be some consistent things about how to use a colon or a semicolon.
Right. Yeah. And we do have some shows in our network that are a little bit less. We do have a science show called Everyday Einstein, and that tends to be a little more current event based. And we had a show called Tech Talker that is completely obsolete. I think we just took down all those because nothing's relevant anymore. Yeah.
So I know we're just at about time here. I want to be sensitive to everybody's schedules. Should we wrap it up? And do you want me to do kind of an outro here, Rob? Do you want to wrap it up?
No, go ahead, Ethan.
Okay,
you want to do it?
All right, sounds good. Well, Minyan, it's been incredible getting to know you a little bit better. I really thank you, Rob, for bringing Minyan on with us as well. I've not only learned a lot of things about podcasting, but about, the networking and the media company and how all of these things came together. And I didn't realize how many things that we had in common too. I studied biology and was in academia, and I have a podcast. So you've got, I think you'll be having a new fan here. I don't pay too much attention to grammar. My emails are horrid when I just write. I almost make mistakes on purpose just to prove that I can get it out quickly. But anyways, yeah, I'll be looking much more into what you're up to. And then anything else that you want to give to, we're live online too. So if you want to say anything to anybody else that is watching, or to the crew here as parting words, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, just thanks for being here. Thanks for caring about podcasting. And my show is Grammar Girl. You can find it on any platform, and you can follow me. The place I spend most of my time is Twitter, and I'm just Grammar Girl there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I'll just basically sign us off the meeting, and we're going to skip next week's episode because it falls right in between Christmas and New Year's. So we'll take a little break there. But we'll be right back the following Monday, and we'll see you all then. We hope you have a very happy holidays and enjoy your family time.
Happy holidays. Thank you, Mignon.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Ciao later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.